Hello there, my name is cjmichelli and I'm the author of the Christian fantasy book series, the Idduran Saga. Like any good fantasy book, my books have maps in the front. So today we're going to take a look at the map of the world of the Idduran Saga. Okay, so first we have the nation of Iddura. It's a kingdom. You can see there's a border here. The northern border is in line with these mountains. Then it goes straight out to the sea over here. So you have all these borders and then these coastlines, and that's the whole kingdom right there. You might notice the name Iddura sounds familiar. Yeah, the series is loosely named after someone from Iddura. Hint, hint, no spoilers. So Iddura actually started out as a series of coastal colonies from an ancient seafaring people known as the Valat. The Valat made settlements along this peninsula here, many of which remain as prominent cities to this day. This is kind of like the whole peninsula here, really. This is really more peninsula-like, but it was coastal settlements all along here. The most prominent of these ancient settlements is Pilvis, which is now the capital of Iddura. It's a wealthy trade city governing much of the trade in the southeast over here. This archipelago here is known as the Sparrow Islands. They're a haven for pirates and other seafaring scum. Many efforts have been made to purge these islands, but they haven't really been successful. At this point in the history of the world of the Idduran Saga, the population of the Sparrow Islands has actually grown so large and stable that these islands may actually become a kingdom of their own soon. I say they might, but the problem is that in order to do that, you'd have to unite a bunch of people who only have one thing in common, and that's their lack of morals and stability. So how do you take a region lacking morals and stability and turn it into a unified political entity under a single king? That's just about impossible, so that might never actually become a kingdom, unless something crazy happens and it's not pirates anymore. We'll see. So over time, the wealth and population of Iddura grew until it became a nation and, had their own king eventually. Over that same period of time, the other nations on this continent were also growing. Okay, moving north a bit, we have the kingdom of Elysia. Now, Elysia began as a collection of city-states in this region here. You can see Elysia's borders are here around the Red Hills. They contact the mountains, and they get to this juncture here. And so it turns into this big sort of boot, or backwards L. Like I said, it used to be a bunch of city-states here in this big lowland region. And this region is known as Metatulia, or the Heartland. Almost 2,000 years before the Idduran Saga, a mighty warrior named Cassius rose up and united the Metatulian city-states under a single banner. He became the first king of the kingdom that at the time began to be known as Eleusia. In later centuries, Eleusinian kings passed through the Gap, which is the widest mountain pass through the mountains here, and they slowly conquered this region over here. Now, this eastern region, from about Kindlus to Nuria, that region is known as Meridian, or, the south, essentially. Now, when Eleusia was limited only here, Alba was its capital. But ever since Elysia conquered Meridian over here, Mythnos has been the capital. Mythnos is more centrally located in the entire kingdom. It has control of the Gap, and so it has good access to Alba, but it also has a paved highway up through Kivanos to Equinor, which means it has full access not just to the wealth of Metatulia, but also Kivanos and Equinor, which are the two wealthiest cities in the entire kingdom. Now, this northern region up here, from Kindlus and up, is known as Aquilon, or Aquilon, and it was only conquered late in Elysia's history from our point of view. Now, Equinor is by far the wealthiest city in northern Elysia. Its only near rivals are Kivinus in Meridian and Alba in Metatulia. Now, Mythnos is the capital, so of course it has its own set of wealth, but it never really got to the point of being as wealthy as these three crowning cities. Equinor gets its wealth through fishing and sea trade because it has this giant, thing here. I'm an author, not a geographer. Equinor also has good highways in and out of the city in all directions, which also helps its wealth because it can move its wealth around and do lots of trade with those highways. So while other cities might have more traditionally political power, Equinor is definitely a force to be reckoned with purely based on its wealth. Money might not buy you happiness, but it can buy you power. All right, moving southwest here. I don't have a script, you have a script. All right, we have the kingdom of Surias. So you see the border again goes up here, connects with some mountains, and moves over into the west this way, past Kotashe. In its antiquity, Surias was a semi-nomadic tribal culture, but eventually a powerful sorcerer discovered artifacts of powerful dark magic near Andera, or Antera, or Andera, depending on how you want to pronounce this word. That's a whole video unto itself, is the pronunciations of all this stuff. So he used these artifacts to take over the region and transform it into a single cohesive political entity through conquest. As he grew in power, he also grew in evil and madness, and he conquered the entire continent eventually and brought it under full submission. It submitted to him, his military, and the monsters birthed from his dark magic. And this Dark Lord's name was Crode. When this Dark Lord mysteriously vanished, his empire quickly crumbled, and the Eleusinian warlord Cassius, from up here, actually took advantage of this chaos and disarray to unify the Metatulian city-states and form the kingdom of Eleusia as a resistant kingdom to the Suriasi Empire. So that's the context for Cassius's unification of the Metatulian city-states, is he was filling a power vacuum left by the dissolution of the Suriasi Empire. Now, moving north again, we have the Suriasi's most fierce enemy, the people of the Makal. Like the Iddurans, the people here traveled to this land by ship centuries prior. They actually weren't here on this continent during Cassius' unification or the empire of Surias and Crode. They weren't here yet. Now the land was here, obviously, but its inhabitants, as we see them in the Idduran Saga, were not there during the empire days. The people up here, the Makal, actually have no name for this land. Instead, they prefer to refer to the land only in reference to their people. In their language, the word for the people is Makkal. So the proper term for this region is just the land or territories of the Makal. Now, the Elysians are a stuck-up bunch, and they don't like using other people's languages to refer to things. So instead, they refer to the Makal as the Vitari, and the Vitari lands as the Vitari lands, or just Vitaria. Because the Makal are new arrivals on the continent, relatively speaking, they are by far the most culturally distinct group on the continent, just so you know. Historically, the Makal have had many wars against Elysia and Surias, including sieges of Agmen Major and Agmen Minor, and a conquest that reached as far south as Bel Eleron here. So their empire rivaled the Suriasi Empire in scale at one point in their history. Another important conflict for the Makal was a war with Surias that lasted over 30 years. This war is remembered bitterly by both cultures, and it's the main reason why a lot of racial and cultural tension still persists between the two peoples. The Makal remember the war as the Ratanati, the River of Blood. The Suryasi remember the war as the Anant Dukh, or the eternal sorrow. Moving far into the north, we have the kingdom of Ikatan. In ancient times, many Elysians actually tried fleeing north through the Kyokai Mountains because there were dragons all over Elysia at the time. And they were just burning cities and slaughtering people left and right. But Ikatan is an Arctic kingdom. They are very far north, as you can see. The ice cap actually touches the upper coast here, and it goes up and down seasonally depending on the year. And when it's especially cold, the ice cap can actually come quite far south. So, needless to say, they did not have the resources to sustain a constant stream of Elysian refugees. So, they fought a long and bloody war to keep Elysians in Elysia, and they built this massive wall that filled in all the gaps of the Kyokai Mountains. Now, by the way, I came up with the idea for this wall in like 2013. Okay, I'm not taking inspiration from modern political events. This predates the whole thing that happened in 2016. Okay, you know who I'm talking about. I thought of this first for the book, not for real life. I thought of it for the book. Anyway, they didn't have the resources to sustain Elysian refugees. So they built this wall to keep the Elysians out and protect their own people from starvation. At the center, they built this huge gatehouse, just this monster behemoth of a building with a giant gate. And the gate is called Sanmon, and it almost never opens. They do not like people passing into their kingdom on land. They don't do that. Now, the capital of Ikatan is here in Kyo. And it's the whole kingdom itself is generally divided into north and south. It's a little fuzzy, with places like Hishi and Sodai over here, which have a little bit more northern influence, or the city of Nishi, which definitely is a culturally northern city, but it is south of the mountains, which are generally speaking the demarcation line between the northern cities and the southern cities, or provinces, if you like. So in the south, obviously, they enjoy a lot more direct contact with Elysia via the sea. All their contact is going to be via the sea. In the south, they enjoy contact with the Makal, with Elysia, and with Idura. So as a result, their clothing styles in the south have been influenced by the Makal. Their metallurgy and science come from Elysia, and they learned shipbuilding from the Iddurans. Well, they didn't learn it from the Iddurans, but they improved it based on Idduran ships. Now, in the north, things are very, very different. The Makal clothing does not stand up to the cold temperatures up here. Science means very little in the long dark of a northern winter, and no matter how advanced the Elysian steel might be, all the steel swords will snap to pieces in the icy north. So the north still favors small-headed spears over long-bladed swords, and they prefer all things northern and ancient over the more modern ideals of the south. This is an ongoing cultural war in Ikatan with no end in sight, really. Moving east, we have the Eastern Isles. Now, those of you who have read the books have heard these islands mentioned, but you have never seen them because they are not currently in the book maps. That's because this is the book map. It's been inked. This one has no detailing and no ink as of yet. But eventually, when these start popping up in the books, which they will, they'll get a lot more detail. So, the largest and richest of these islands is Echoron, or Echoron, or Echorium, depending on which country is pronouncing its name. That's complicated. Echoron is actually large enough to have distinct biomes, including deserts, jungles, grassy plains, temperate forests all over the place. The grassy plains dominate at the center of the island, and they're home to large tribes of horse breeders. In the north, we have this smaller island called Dunia. This is the coldest of the eastern islands, actually, as you might expect, with it being northernmost. This is the northern hemisphere of this planet, by the way. So it's so cold that the ice cap that touches the shores of Yucatan often touch the northern shores here, which allows them to actually march over to Yucatan on foot. Now, Dunia's navy has never been as strong as Yucatan's navy, largely because Yucatan has much larger and stronger forests. Dunia is not very forested, very few trees over here. But Yucatan has loads of trees, so they have a much larger and more powerful navy. So, because they don't have the lumber, they just bide their time, and they breed their mammoths, and then when the time comes and the ice descends, they actually march across the sea straight on into Yucatani territory. It's pretty metal. Obviously, when they have these campaigns over here to fight and raid against the Yucatani, they have to keep careful watch and make sure that the ice cap doesn't actually recede too far, or they'll never make it back home. There have been campaigns from Dunia that have met failure over here because they stayed too long and the ice betrayed them, and they could not make it back to their island, and Yucatan just slaughtered them. Dunia is also home to some very, very ancient and powerful magical sects. They live especially high up in the mountains because, sorcerers like to be recluses. Now, far in the southwest, we have Sirtoma, or Sirtoma, depending on how Americanized you want the pronunciation. So, Sirtoma used to be a colony of Idura because of its proximity, obviously, but it gained its independence later on. Idura still calls it Sirtoma, but the island's people call it Kwawo. The two nations, believe it or not, are actually still allies to this day. There's healthy trade and immigration both ways. Kwawo has two official languages, Idduran and Kwawo. Kwawo's position in the east has grown kind of tense over the years because its history with Idura does keep it loyal to Idura, but its proximity to Ecoron and the other eastern isles means that they have to have some kind of treaty relations with these other islands. Otherwise, it'll be nonstop war. But this island confederacy is headed up by Ecoron, which is a military enemy of Idura. So Sirtoma has to navigate this tense situation between these two enemies. It's kind of the middleman, as it were, trying to make friends with mortal enemies. It's a weird situation. So obviously, these large islands aren't all of them there is to the islands. Obviously, there's going to be lots of like tiny satellite islands here and there that each of the islands claims as its own. But Aru down here is unique among them in that it actually has several large islands that it claims as its own. These are actually all three one political entity. Now, granted, Aru is also a member of this Eastern Confederacy, but it claims all these under its king or governor, its lord. These are all known as the islands of Aru. Interestingly, the capital of Aru is not on this island or this island, but it's on the island in the center. That way it stays close, but separate from these two islands. Obviously, the tribes over here and the tribes over here have their long-standing feuds, and they've tried to separate occasionally, but they all eventually stay united. There's a lot of national pride despite the feuding, as you might imagine. Now, Aru is very, very rich in gold and copper, especially on this more western island, and it has been very instrumental in enriching both Idura and Ecoron. And it, obviously, since it's trading with Idura, it's going to be one of these strange bedfellows as well. But Ecoron still no likey the Idura. So Sirtoma has a closer relationship with Idura, and Aru less so, but definitely still friends with Idura. So both of these more southern islands are in a weird position with Ecoron, and we'll see how that develops over time. Now, far to the south, nowhere even on the map because it's so far south, we have a little archipelago known as the islands of Calayan. These are actually so far south that they're tropical. I think I'll have to draw these on a separate sheet of paper because, like I said, they're just out of those islands are just out of the bounds of this map. Now, I will say they are so far away from the main islands here that Ecuador doesn't pay them very much attention. They get some attention, but not a lot. Now, the agreement between Calayan and the Eastern Confederacy is just mostly non-violence, and Calayan defers to Ecuador still as the senior partner in the Confederacy, but Ecuador is rewarded for its protection and confederacy with Calayan by getting fishing rights and sailing rights in Calayan, in Calais waters, which is cool. They both benefit from this partnership. So yeah, that's about it for the Eastern Islands. Anyway, so there you have it. The map of the world of the Idduran Saga. Are there countries you guys want a closer look at? Is there something you want to know more about cities or regions or history? Not everything is in there, but there's a lot there. So if you guys want a deeper dive on a certain subject, I'll happily tell you what's going on there and pretend that I didn't write it for the video. If you have ideas, let me know in the comments below. I'm very excited to continue this journey with you guys.